I'm Abhinandan Shekhar. On News Launch today, Shekhar Kapur is going to talk about social media. And he's a very active Twitterati, is that the term?
Wow.
And he has been very active in supporting Team Anna, for which I'm hugely grateful. Thank you for that, first of all.
Thank you.
Now tell me the power of that in politics and in the creative space.
Politics doesn't follow culture. Politics doesn't examine the aspirations of the people and pander to those aspirations. So what we have to see is social media changing our culture? No, I don't think it's changing our culture. But I think social media is coming as a point of where we relate to each other will change our culture. I think the great power of social media is the end of the gatekeepers. So now in any one way, right? I was at the Kellogg Business School and I was giving elections social media and I called it Blogistan.
Okay.
Now, the whole idea that the new nations will be nations of ideas.
Right.
Right? And ideas forming, and I'm not saying there'll be permanent formations, but they will be temporarily forming around ideas.
But because they can be connected.
Because of connectivity,
Because the
yes.
nature of the medium, it's on the computer, just the practicality of, like, my mother gets confused if she has to use a phone with, touch technology. So just because of the medium, is it that it's just the youth who connect? Like, for example, the Anna movement was one movement where the youth really connected to. You were one of the people who were actively supporting it. But by and large, this is the young people.
Yeah.
So is it just the young ideas that find space in the internet space?
No. I think what happens is, well, one thing certainly happened that new media provoked old media. So
Okay.
when I would not give an interview, I would tweet, because I would listen to what people were saying. For example, they were saying, well, you can't say anything against the parliament because you're saying it against democracy. Hey, guys, you know what? You're sitting in the parliament, please go read the constitution. Right? Go read the constitution and then re-examine what you said.
Right.
So I
Certain
would,
things are taken for granted which are being busted. Coffee.
yeah. So the great thing was, at that time I was using new media to provoke old media, then who would come back to me and say, what did you mean? Will you come and say it?
Why does old media need to be provoked? I mean, why is it that they will not challenge status quo unless they're pushed to it? Why do you think that is?
Because they're gatekeepers. That's the whole thing. You see, they're like censors of themselves. So there's a censor board which says, you, the community, doesn't know what is good for you, and therefore we will tell you what's good for you.
Newspapers and channels take on that mantle.
Yeah, they take on that mantle because they've become their own censors now. The assumption that the community doesn't have any way to express itself, or an organic way where the solution comes organically through the community, that's new media, social media, and that's what they fear. So records become a hit because they put out free, and out of them they come out. So somebody creates a record, an album. Lehman he hasn't done it, he should. Puts out an album, and people love it or hate it, and then suddenly it becomes number one in social media in consumption.
I read about a woman who had put her book out. It was rejected by publishers.
Yeah.
She put it out for 99 cents, and it sold
it's
millions.
millions. So the fear is, so the music company says, then who are we in this equation? You aren't.
So
You're
it
a
challenges
gatekeeper.
the commerce.
It challenges gatekeeping. It increases commerce. It challenges old forms of commerce, but brings in a new form of commerce, because ultimately what is commerce? What was the Great Silk Road? Except people trying to connect to each other, and it increased trade. Trade increased commerce. Commerce increased technology. Technology increases commerce, and it creates wealth. What is social media doing? It's connectivity. It's the instantaneous Great Silk Road.
And the attempt to stifle that, as the government proposes from time to time.
Yeah, partly they're right, because their existence now. See, the point is, why did we say elections 5 years? Because we couldn't have it. It's just not practical. If somebody at that time had found a solution to having an election every day, they would have had it. But there's no solution. Now, it's what I've already suggested is do away with the parliament and have a supercomputer that everybody's tapping into every day, and every time you make a decision, right, 500 million people can suddenly vote instantaneously every day to say, I like that, I don't like that, and out of that supercomputer will come the answer.
You think that's possible in the future? That's where we're headed?
It's possible now. Now that we're getting all the identity numbers, it's possible now. And we have 750 million phone connections, smartphone connections. It's theoretically possible now. And the theory of democracy is exactly that. Yeah, the rule of the majority. The practicality of democracy was every 5 years.
Right.
I'm saying that the practicality of democracy of every 5 years
Should not become the rule.
should not become the rule.
We shouldn't confuse the practicality of it as
Yeah.
the essence or the spirit
Yeah.
of it.
And so what happens is, in a world that was once, didn't change much in 5 years, it's so changing every 5 years that the act and the repercussions of the act happen. So if somebody takes $10 billion away, they're gone. You know, and so you're going to vote
I think
after
it's
5 years.
It'll be quite an effort to get one's head around that. Even I'm figuring how that would work. But yeah, I think mindsets have to change. In old media, do you have any moment of pride as far as electronic media, which is much criticized and much maligned by most people, that it's too hysterical, it's too shrill? You're a huge watcher of news. In the last few years, what has been for you the moment of pride for electronic media, and what has been the moment of shame?
The great moment of pride in electronic media was when I wrote a short story it was called A BlackBerry Addict Discovers Grassroots India. I wrote a short story about an experience of trying to get my BlackBerry repaired in a shop that was like 4 feet by 4 feet, where two kids lying about the ages replaced a BlackBerry for nothing, for no money, and I was on my way to buy a new BlackBerry. Right? Here's the proudest moment. About a month after that, it was on my blog. I didn't. It wasn't even tweeted. It was just on my blog. Now we use Twitter to drive traffic, right?
Yeah.
A month later, I kept getting this back. I got it back from Google saying you should read this because I was very interested in new media. I kept getting back from my friends saying you should read this, and I said, what do you mean read it? I wrote it. And then suddenly I saw one day I keyword BlackBerry on Google, and it was number 3. Now can you imagine, at a time when BlackBerries was so being talked about because of all the problems BlackBerry was going through, getting to number 3, that means that millions of people had read that. And I realized the power of viral. I don't know how many people must have read that for it to climb up to
Without being pushed on Twitter
without being
or
pushed,
anything.
and without being pushed on Twitter. So that certainly was an eye-opener for me, a huge eye-opener
What's
for me.
possible online.
Yeah, what's
And as
possible.
far as television news channels are concerned, their coverage, do you think there have been any moments of pride?
They have licenses from the government, which can be
And
taken away.
uplink rights and 50
Yeah.
crores for uplink
Yeah,
stuff
and
like
they
that.
have a return on shareholders that they have to manage, and they have overheads, huge
That
overheads.
means they can't be honest? They can't
That they
say
can
what
only be
think?
honest to a certain point. After that, they cannot be honest. Now, that's one thing. And the other thing is, there are 4 people that control it. You see, even a television channel, there are 4 people, 4 editorials or 5 editorials who decide, well, this is the point of view. They may not represent what people want. And their point of view will color the way news
coverage
is given. It's not
across the channel.
possible. Yeah. See, nobody, all fact is interpretation.
And because most television channel heads belong to a certain class, you think there is certain homogeneity in the perspectives or the positions that they take?
I have to say they try not to.
They try not to. you
They
said.
try not to. But then there is
But it's
this other
inevitable,
call.
it's
I remember
internalized.
somewhere my cook suddenly came to me after Michael Jackson died. He said, साहब वो माइकल जैक्सन तो अभी जिंदा है वो तो उन्होंने वो झूठ बोल रहे हैं अभी तो उन्होंने दिखाया उसका भूत डांस कर रहा है I said, what are you talking about? So I went and he was watching a television channel I would not make, saying that was a duplicate who died, and they had taken you remember the Michael Jackson rehearsal videos came out?
Right.
They said, look, we just shot him, he's still dancing. No, they could do anything. Now, if this was on social media, it would have been cut down like that. So, social media represents a community's idea. The rule of the majority, once a lot of people on social media, is much more obvious in social media than it is on any television channel.
What about the abuse angle? I mean, even right now they're discussing trolls or the attacks that people, very active Twitter use of people who are active on social media and public figures such as yourself.
Yeah.
Do you come under a lot of abuse, a lot of attack? And
I don't.
okay,
There is a certain culture that has set in, and it sets in amazingly fast. When I first went on Twitter, there were more people just saying, oh boy, we can abuse Shekhar Kapur. It's fallen away. And you know what I started to do? I would post the abuse back, not to them, to say to the community, do you agree with this person? And the person would stop. I get a certain amount of my blog, which is very popular, but I get a certain amount of fundamentalism, and I try and cut it down. But you know what? When it comes, I post it, and then there's 90% of the people come back and say, throw this person out of the blog. So there is a self-censorship.
So there's a democratization of the censorship as well.
Yeah, complete democratization. And I think that most social media, I mean, there's a whole pornography, but then you have pornography in every media,
Sure.
right? But let's look at Wikipedia. Look how it's done.
Yeah.
You know,
20 people in a room and look what they've
and
created.
today there's no, I mean, do you remember something called Encyclopedia Britannica? It doesn't exist anymore. It's taken over Wikipedia. I mean, I was talking to some of the authors, say, how do you do your research? They say, well, we go to Wikipedia. So you can't tell me that social media, which is what Wikipedia is not of great value, right? And yes, people will post nasty things, scroll things, but the community does away with them.
The community is the filter.
Yeah.
You don't need an external filter.
Yeah, you don't.
When it comes to news channels, do you have a favorite?
No.
Journalists, newspapers, do you have a favorite in any of these spaces?
I used to read, obviously I grew up with everybody read Times of India.
Yeah.
And so you read Times of India because your dad read Times of India. But then as you start to discern, I read Google News.
You read?
Google News.
Google News. Okay.
I look at newspapers only for pictures now. But if I need to understand something,
And that gets news from all papers, so you get a...
So I get Google News. I get, I troll. I get sites that give me so this is what New York Times is saying. So it's so easy today. I want to know about this festival. I'll just type it out, and I'll get 25 sites of saying, okay, so this. And once you get used to that,
So now your viewing habits or reading habits are not brand-based anymore.
no, they're not brand based. They're just going.
And that is the future, you think?
That's now. How many people? I have something that iPad gave me called Newsstand. I really laughed at that, and it has a little shelf in which all the papers I subscribe to come there. But I don't read them. I itemize and personalize Google News. And there'll be 10 other sites that do that for me. And I read those. And then from there, it's like you read a headline, oh, that's what I'm interested in. Or I say, okay, I follow technology, I follow Indian politics, I follow culture, I follow water issues, So I just put that in as my favorites, and so I'll read everything that comes in there.
Another time I'd like to do an interview with you about water. Not the film, but water issues.
Okay.
Until then, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.